Henry bought the house for demolition at the end of October when cold rains had already begun in Pennsylvania and the air grew heavy, saturated with the smell of wet leaves and rusted metal. The house stood on the outskirts of Brynwood, a small, nearly forgotten town not far from Pittsburgh, where dozens of factories had once operated and where now only empty industrial shells and a handful of residents remain, those who had not managed or not dared to leave. The house was exactly the kind of property people bought for the land alone, crooked with broken windows, a sagging roof, and peeling paint that revealed traces of several old repairs beneath it. The price was suspiciously low, almost half the market value, and that gave Henry pause, but the paperwork was clean, the ownership history short and unremarkable, and the technical description contained only a few lines: a single-story structure built in 1958, no basement, no extensions, no registered utilities, no architectural or historical value. His plan was simple: demolish the house within a week, clear the lot, and resell it in the spring when the market picked up. Everything seemed straightforward until the moment he stepped inside for the first time. The house was empty, yet it did not feel dead. A persistent smell of machine oil hung in the air, thin, intrusive, and completely unlike mold, old wood, or dust, though there was plenty of dust as well. At first, Henry assumed someone had once stored tools or old equipment there, but the smell never faded no matter how long the windows remained open. It was strongest in the living room, where the floor seemed strangely even, too even for a house of that age. The boards did not creak or sag. When the workers began dismantling the floor, the planks came up easily, but beneath them lay concrete, thick, smooth, perfectly leveled. The kind of concrete poured in industrial buildings, not in residential homes from the late 1950s. That was when Henry felt the first stirrings of unease. This concrete slab appeared in no documents, no blueprints, no inspection reports. Beneath the concrete, they found metal, and when the dust settled, it became clear that it was a door embedded into the floor as if it had never been meant to be opened again. The door did not look old, it looked sealed, as though time itself had barely touched it. There was no handle, no conventional lock, no visible hinges on the outside, only a number stamped directly into the metal in a neat industrial font, 17-B. The workers exchanged glances, and for the first time, Henry considered that this might be more than an ordinary construction anomaly. When the door was forced open, a staircase descended into darkness beneath the house, and a wave of cold, dry air rose from below. It did not smell of soil or dampness, but of a closed technical space. Henry went down first, carefully counting the steps, and with each one he noticed how the acoustics changed. The sounds from above faded, replaced by the dull echo of concrete beneath his feet. What lay below was not a basement, that much was immediately clear. Beneath the house was a fully equipped production workshop with high ceilings, a smooth concrete floor, ventilation shafts branching off into the distance, and industrial-grade electrical wiring neatly laid inside metal conduits. Heavy machines lined the walls, massive, solid, clearly designed for long-term operation. Some were carefully covered with protective sheets as if prepared for long-term storage. Others stood exposed, their levers and switches locked in place as though the work had been stopped mid-process. On one of the machines lay a metal blank, and Henry immediately noticed the strange contrast. The edges were lightly rusted, but the cut surface looked relatively fresh, as if the metal had not had time to fully age. Nameplates hung on the walls, surnames only, all in the same font, all the same size, with no dates, no titles, and nothing but names arranged in rows. In the corner of the workshop stood a cabinet filled with folders. Inside were blueprints, technical diagrams, and logbooks, all compiled with professional precision and not a single unnecessary note. In one logbook, the final entry consisted of just one line: work halted, facility sealed. No signature, no stamp, no date. When Henry climbed back upstairs, he realized the house above may not have been built for living at all, but as a cover, something meant to conceal what lay beneath. That thought stayed with him well into the evening when, for the first time, He considered that the story of this place might not be over. Henry did not call the authorities right away. That decision later would trouble him more than anything else. At first, he told himself that there had to be a rational explanation, some forgotten private workshop, an unregistered operation from the years when regulations were loose and record-keeping unreliable. Brynwood had been full of small subcontractors decades ago, companies that opened and disappeared without leaving much trace behind. Still, the more time Henry spent reviewing the documents from the workshop, the less convincing that explanation became. The equipment was too standardized, the layouts too precise, the ventilation and wiring too carefully designed for something unofficial or temporary. Over the next 2 days, Henry contacted local archives, first online, then in person, driving to the county records office outside Pittsburgh. He searched for construction permits, zoning exemptions, industrial registrations, anything that might reference underground facilities or special use structures beneath residential properties. There was nothing. The parcel number matched the house, but every historical record described the lot as residential from the moment it was first developed. No amendments, no revisions, no anomalies. One archivist, an elderly woman who had worked there since the early 1980s, studied the photographs Henry showed her longer than the others. She said very little, only that records from the 1960s were sometimes incomplete and that some projects were handled elsewhere and never made it into the public system. When Henry pressed her on what elsewhere meant, she simply shook her head and slid the photos back across the desk. That same evening, Henry noticed something else that unsettled him far more than missing paperwork. The power meter outside the house, which had been inactive since the purchase, showed a brief spike shortly after midnight. It lasted less than a minute. Not enough to trip anything, not enough to trigger a system restart, just enough to register. The following night, Henry installed cameras in the workshop below. No network connection, local storage only. He did not expect them to record anything. He told himself it was a precaution, nothing more. At 2:17 a.m., the cameras captured sound. A low, rhythmic, mechanical hum, steady and precise, unmistakably industrial. The machines did not move, no lights turned on, the breakers remained off, yet the sound persisted for almost 40 seconds before cutting out abruptly as if someone had flipped a switch somewhere else. When Henry returned to the workshop the next morning, nothing appeared disturbed except for one detail. On a workbench near the center of the room lay a metal component that had not been there before. It was warm to the touch and identical down to the smallest dimension to a part shown on one of the blueprints marked as prototype, incomplete. At that moment, Henry understood something he had been avoiding since the first day. Whatever had been built beneath his house had not simply been abandoned, it had been paused, and someone somewhere still remembered exactly where to find it. Henry began to notice changes almost immediately after the cameras recorded the sound. Subtle things at first, easy to dismiss if he wanted to. A black sedan parked across the street one morning, engine running, no plates on the front bumper. It was gone by the time he came back out with his phone. Later that day, his contractor called to say he would no longer be working on the site. No argument, no explanation, just a short apology and a request not to be contacted again. When Henry checked his voicemail that evening, there was a single message from an unknown number. No voice, so just silence, followed by a faint clicking sound, like a relay switching on and off. He slept poorly that night, waking several times, convinced he could hear movement beneath the house, not loud enough to identify, but too regular to be random. The following afternoon, Henry received an email that did not reference the property by address, name, or parcel number. It referred to it only as the structure. The message was brief and professionally worded. It stated that the land Henry had purchased was subject to a pending reassessment and that an offer would be made to acquire it in full. The amount listed was more than 10 times what he had paid. No negotiation clause, no justification, just a deadline, 48 hours. Henry drove back to the county office, but this time the receptionist told him his request had already been reviewed and closed. When he asked by whom, she said the file had been transferred and was no longer accessible. That evening, someone knocked on his door just after sunset. 2 men stood on the porch, neither carrying identification. They were polite, calm, almost friendly. One of them explained that certain facilities built during the late industrial expansion period had been misclassified for decades, and that correcting those records was a matter of public safety. The other added, almost casually, that continued presence on the property could expose Henry to liability he didn't want. When Henry asked what had been produced in the workshop beneath his house, the first man smiled slightly and said, "Nothing that concerns you anymore." After they left, Henry went downstairs. The workshop lights were still off, the breakers unchanged, the machine silent, but the metal component he had found that morning was gone. In its place lay a folded sheet of paper, no logo, no letterhead, just a single sentence printed in black ink. The facility was never decommissioned. At that moment, Henry understood the offer was not a negotiation, it was a warning, and whatever lay beneath the house was not meant to be uncovered, only contained. Henry accepted the offer 46 hours after receiving the letter. He did not negotiate the amount, did not ask for clarifications, and did not attempt to delay the process. By then, he understood that the money was not compensation, but an apology, polite, final, and non-negotiable. The documents were signed quickly without a notary and without a specific address. In the paperwork, the land was referred to only as the site and the house as a temporary structure of no functional value. The next day, vehicles arrived. They were not municipal and not private. No logos, no license plates, drivers who avoided eye contact and did not answer questions. The work began immediately. The workshop was not dismantled, it was sealed. The machines were shut down one by one, strictly following a predefined sequence as if a procedure had been written long ago and simply resumed. The nameplates were removed first, then the staircase was filled in. After that, the space itself was flooded with concrete, layer by layer, slowly and methodically, leaving no voids behind. Henry watched the entire process and noticed that none of the workers evaluated the equipment for value. Nothing was removed, it was buried. The house above was left standing. A week later, Henry received revised documents. According to them, the house had been built in 1958, had no underground structures, and was scheduled for demolition under standard procedure. All previous records were declared erroneous and removed. Henry left Brynwood 2 days later without saying goodbye to anyone and without leaving a forwarding address. Months later, he attempted to find information about the workshop again through archives, historical maps, and satellite imagery. Nothing remained, as if the place had never existed at all. Sometimes at night, he still dreams of a steady mechanical sound, calm, functional, emotionless, the sound of a system that was never shut down, only placed into standby mode. And what would you have done in his place?